And we are here with Peter Malinoski. Did I pronounce that correctly, Peter?
Close enough. Close enough.
Close enough. Got a couple of quick shots before we get into the meat of the interview. What is your favorite guitar out there besides yours?
Well, I'm not a guitar player, so I have no favorite guitars.
Hey, that's fair. That's fair. What?
Bass player. If anything, I'm a bass player, and even there, it's been so long since I've really been interested in other instruments that I'm drawing a blank. I have no answer for that.
All right. Well, that's fair. Totally fair. What is your favorite wood to make guitars out of?
Oh, that's another one. That's kind of vague. There's so many nice woods that you can't say just one. That's like people when they come in, they say, "Well, what kind of wood do you use?" I mean, I use like 30 types of wood, so there's no one in particular. You know, they're just all nice quality hardwoods. I like to use domestic American woods as much as possible because they're right here and they're really nice. But there's certain parts of the guitar you have to use, like fretboards. There's no really good domestic dark wood that works, that'll make a good fretboard. I mean, maple's fine, but that's that light colored stuff. So if you want a dark colored wood, you have to go to some African or Caribbean or South American hardwood. But I prefer to use domestic wood as much as possible.
Oh, that's cool. That's very, very cool. Now we met up at the Sonic Valley Guitar Show here in Pittsburgh just probably about a month and a half ago, and you had arguably the most unique guitar designs there. You had probably the most unique instruments there. How did you get started building? Where did these designs come from?
Well, like I said, I'm not a guitar player, so I'm not wed to the history of guitars. I didn't grow up with a Strat or a Tele or a Gibson or anything in my hand, so I don't covet them like so many guitar players do. And in fact, the truth is, I hadn't really even picked up a Stratocaster until like 2 years ago. I've been making guitars since the mid '80s, and I never really picked up a Strat until a couple years ago when I was at a show, and a friend of mine who makes clones, I said, "All right, what are these things all about?" And this first time, it's like, "Oh, okay, whatever. I don't know. It doesn't feel the same to me because my guitars feel so different." But I started making instruments, making basses, because I was, back in the '80s, there were really no choices. I mean, this was before boutique anything, and there were, few choices for guitars, but for basses it was even less. So I was in art school, and I had keys to the wood shop because, my work-study job was to sweep up the wood shop. I didn't know anything about how to do any wood. I was a metal sculpture kind of guy, like a lot of art students, grinding and welding and casting wood. But I was around furniture and a couple furniture makers at the same time playing in bands with, my Fender Precision bass. And one day I just looked at it and said, this is basically just a paddle with strings on it. And I can do better than this. And this coincidentally happened right around this time that Steinberger came out with a completely different idea of the bass, and that's probably what really inspired me. It's like, well, wait a minute, you don't have to have a paddle with strings on it. It can be done a different way. And so I just went for it, and within a year I'd sold my Precision and haven't, I've played my own instruments ever since. Those first few were not that good. I mean, I still have the first one, which surprisingly is a great little bass. It's a 30-inch short scale. I mean, it's just a hoot to play. And but the first 10 or so were just dogs. I mean, let's face it, they were just terrible. I was learning how to do woodworking, and at the same time how to build a guitar. So they were bad. But that's the way it goes. That's how you learn. You make things and then you make them better.
I think it's ironic that I have my Steinberger sitting right next to me, actually, at the moment. So,
yeah, well, that just blew everything out of the water. I mean, no one saw that coming, it just was, oh my God, what is this? And how is this even possible? And when you think about it, it's because it's because electric guitars bases had stalled. I mean, they were a victim of their own success. There was no reason for anybody to make them any differently or think about it any differently, because that's all anybody wanted. And I mean, that's the way it continues today. I mean, it's when people find out that I make guitars, the first question is, well, what kind of guitars? And I say, well, my guitars. Yeah, but what kind of guitars do you make? And they want me to say Fender or Gibson or Strat or Tele or Les Paul, because that's all I know. I mean, that's all. It's just assumed that that's the way they are. And back in the 80s, it was just assumed that you had a Fender bass or a Gibson or a Rickenbacker, and that was it. And and how could anybody possibly come up with a better idea than that? And I mean, that's what really woke me up. That's what got me inspired to do it.
That is so cool. So you taught yourself how to make guitars, which I find amazing, because that's one aspect of playing that I just haven't tried yet. Did you have to run out and buy a bunch of special tools? Did you have to, renovate the basement to make it work? How did you?
Well, no, I was in art school. I stayed in art school until there was nothing left, and they threw me out. I learned everything in college. I went to art school to learn how to, basically to rent the shops. It was because I couldn't afford to have my own equipment. So, I mean, my collegiate career started basically in architecture, where I got my design studies, my first 2 years of design, and that's where everything goes back to that now. My sense of design goes back to those first 2 years of architecture. But then I realized they're not making anything. I wanted to make things, and they're just drawing pictures and talking about stuff. And so I had friends who were in the College of Fine Arts, and they were having a grand old time and were making things that I wanted to. So I eventually transferred over into fine arts, and into sculpture, which was the obvious three-dimensional thing. But my work study was to clean up the wood shop, and no one used the wood shop because no one knew how to use the tools, and they're in there, and you're going to cut your fingers off, and they're scary, and most art students don't want to do that. They're kind of lazy anyway. They'd rather just go make a lot of noise with a grinder and not hurt themselves. And it was because I had access to the wood shop that I realized, well, wood is a different animal, than you can't bend it, you can't heat it up and do things to it. It requires a lot of precision, and I threw myself into it stupidly, not knowing how dangerous it was. And one of the only major accidents I ever had with a power tool was the first time I used it, because I didn't know what I was doing. But I stayed there and used those facilities, good old State Youth, as long as I could until, and continued on, after I got my bachelor's degree. Then I got a MA in another college out in Murray, Kentucky, for what was called functional design, kind of a loose term for furniture making. And that's when I really kind of started concentrating on wood, learning how to make furniture and all sorts of things. And then even after I got an MA, I went back and got an MFA in Arizona State to continue learning how to use wood, and then, at that point I started to specialize more in guitars, even though they were terrible back then. That's when I really started turning my focus to it. But my background in knowledge of wood comes from making furniture first, before I was really any good at making guitars. Guitars are very specialized woodworking. Furniture's not easy. Making a good piece of furniture is difficult to do. I mean, if you don't make a chair good, somebody sits on it, it breaks. So you got to know how to build things in furniture, and a lot of the same sense of structure and how to put things together translates is the same in guitars. It's just guitars have a lot more specialized things you have to know, like fretting and how to set up a guitar, stuff that you don't worry about in furniture making. But the fit and finish is a lot is the same. So I didn't have my own shop for years. And the problem there is that when I finally got booted out of school because there, it was a terminal degree, there was nothing else for me to do, and this was 1992, I believe. I didn't make guitars for probably, 10 years. I would spit one out every now and then, just basically whittling one with a pocket knife, but I had no facilities, and I couldn't do anything, and at the same time, nobody cared back then. That was pre-internet days, and the fixation on Tele Strats and Les Pauls was huge back then. So people looked at, and my guitars back then were pretty crazy. You think they're crazy now. They were really crazy back then, and people just scratched their head and had no idea how to even consider what I was making. So I lost probably 10 good years of production because nobody cared. And I didn't have a facility to do it. So eventually, I built up my own shop and got suckered back into this.
Wow, that is really cool.
Yeah, it's weird because I've always loved guitars. I always wanted to make them, but nobody cared, and so I just gave up and went in another direction completely. I was one of those guys out in doing dragging the tent around at street fairs, selling big bad paintings of flowers, because that's all anybody would. If you're an artist, what are you going to do? Nobody wants your stuff. You got to make something somebody wants if you want to survive as an artist. And so that's what I was doing. But because of the internet, things, I'd posted a few pictures here and there in the early days, way back in 99 and 2000 and, 97. And those pictures floated around and got people's attention, and they just wouldn't go away. That's the one lesson with the internet. Once it's on, you're never getting it off again. So those pictures were of these odd instruments were working for me, even though I didn't care. And that's how people just kept asking me every now and then, do you still make them? Do you still make them? And finally I just said, okay, I'm going to just go into this whole hog again. And at the perfect time when suddenly people cared, and then I could make a living at it.
That's really cool. Now, I noticed one of the problems with a lot of boutique guitars is that the wood is not seasoned. You grab some of these boutique guitars, and the next thing you know, you've got your frets are all out of whack. Your fret ends are sticking out, all kinds of stuff.
Well, a lot of that is, it's most of. There's no special wood. This is one of the things I hate. One of my most annoying things is the whole tone wood. There's no such thing as tone wood. Wood is wood. It grows on trees, for God's sakes. It's wood. There's no magic to it. And if you're smart at all, you're going to get wood that's been kiln dried and seasoned properly. And I'm not going to touch a piece of wood some guy cut down his backyard and left in his attic for 10 years, because I don't trust that piece of wood. It could move any direction it wants to at any time. If it's been cured correctly in a kiln, then chances are it's a whole lot more stable. And you pick the timbers that are the straightest, that aren't going to move for those situations. The neck especially. If it starts to move, you're done. That's a guitar killer. But things like, fret poke, that's wood. It shrinks and it swells as the seasons go, and until you finally trim those frets down when it's at the driest time of year, like in February, it's going to continue to do that. Just like your doors in your house are going to swell up at times and shrink back at times. That's wood. That's the way wood is. The problem with a lot of boutique guitars is that they're just doing anything anybody wants. They say, I want this wood with this body and this, that, and, they're mismatching all these woods. It's like, yeah, whatever you want. You're paying for it, you get it, and they'll end up with a guitar that doesn't sound very good because maybe the woods are not balanced out correctly. It's too hard or it's too soft, and that does translate a lot through even though they're boat paddles, essentially, I maintain that, it's still, the wood tone does translate through. So, I approach it like a piece of furniture. It's got to be solid, number one. It's got to be structurally sound. And, I think maybe a lot of guys will fudge on that a little bit just to please the customer, because the customer reads things and thinks, I got to have this kind of a fretboard, and I got to have this kind of a neck, and I got to have this kind of a body, and a lot of that's just baloney. What matters is, you should always trust the guitar maker to know how he makes the guitar best, because everybody builds them a little different, so they're going to know what they do best.
Now, the thing that I found interesting is that I think that's the first time I've ever heard any luthier mention a balance between hardwood and softer wood. Can you?
I'm not a luthier. First of all, let's get that clear. I'm not a luthier, and luthier is a bad term. Luthiers are guys who make hollow body instruments like violins and arch tops and flat top guitars. I make boat paddles, and anybody who makes solid body guitars makes a boat paddle. We're not luthiers, so don't even like that term. Even though, we don't have an option, people still call us that. We call ourselves guitar makers. And there's a lot of, obviously there's most of the sound of a guitar is coming through all the electronics, but there is a certain amount there's a lot that the woods and the construction add to that, not only just microphonically, because you tap on a pickup, you're picking up microphonic sound, and it's picking up that part of the wood, but it's also how everything reacts so that the strings ring the way they do, and you avoid dead spots and all of those issues. That has to do with the wood, and it's been proven over time that you don't need to have a boat anchor 12-pound guitar to have good sustain. That's back in the 80s. That was the theory, because Duane Allman had a boat anchor guitar, and he had the endless ringing sustain, and everybody thought that's the way it had to be. And then those guys all got old and their shoulders hurt, and they started complaining and say, well, can we do this any lighter? And then before you know it, people are hollowing out the insides of the guitars, and then nobody noticed. And then you've got semi-hollow guitars, and then nobody noticed the difference. And then now there's lighter woods that you can use, like Spanish cedar is infinitely light wood, has great sustain. So a lot of the theories about what you would think would be obvious theories that the harder, the denser, the more sustain you can get aren't necessarily true. I mean, there's a lot of things. There's a lot of other things going on in physics that will compensate one end to the other, and it basically comes down to you just have to have a good solid construction. But I like mixing hard and soft woods to get more range, more of a warmer range. If everything's really, really hard, then it's going to be a very brittle sounding guitar. If it's very, very soft, everything's too soft, then it's going to be mushy sounding. So I like it somewhere in between, where you get a nice, you get big round tones with nice swell, but it's not really, really ice picky and sharp, and you definitely don't want a mushy guitar. Everybody hates that. those are those cheap ones that cost $200, because they're really using soft, terrible pieces of wood, and they're hardly put together, so that they just, they don't ring at all.
I think they're down around $100 right now.
It's just amazing. I don't know how they do it. You can't buy the components. Even if they're crappy components, you can't buy the components that cheap. It's shocking to me how cheap they can be.
Now, you have, I said before, and I'll probably say a couple more times, some of the most unique guitar designs that I've seen in a very long time, which obviously was the first thing to catch my eye. Can you just go through, what is your design process? Do you just start winging it? Do you have a picture in your head before you go? What is the design process like for you?
Well, first you got to go back to the fact that I don't know how to build a regular guitar. I don't know how to build a Fender. I don't know how to build a Gibson, and so I've developed my own techniques, how to, structurally how they go together. That's number one. You got to know how to. You can draw all the pictures you want, and this is an issue with guitars in general that bug me. You can draw all the pictures you want, but the guitar exists in 3 dimensions. Most people don't acknowledge that. They look at a guitar like it's a cardboard cutout. It's like you only look at the front, just don't even look at the back. That's just a flat slab back there with some some god-awful, cover plate thing stuck on there just to, just don't look back there. Well, my approach is different. It's an entire object to me, front, back, side. It's got shape. It's an object. It's a three-dimensional object. It's not a 2D cutout. It's not a graphics design project. So I approach it, number one, that way. How's it going to look in all dimensions? How can I can only build what I know how to build, so I have to design around my techniques of how it's constructed and also how to put it together. What are the stages involved in the process of building a guitar, because you can only build it a certain way, in a certain order and make it come out the way that I want. And this is stuff I've learned over the years, because I've made plenty of mistakes where, early on I would work myself into corners, like painting yourself into a corner. Well, how the hell do I get out of this to make it work? And then the next time you do it, you put everything in the right steps necessary in order to get to the end result. So having that basis of knowledge, then I'll back up and think about what it looks like, right? There's always the guitar always has to work. The knobs have to be in a place where they're right. The switches have to be in the right place. The strings, obviously, between the nut and the bridge, that all has to be perfect. And that's all written in stone. You can't change that. But the rest of it is just jewelry, it's ornamentation. And so I'll work with different pieces of wood that I think are going to work well together visually and structurally, and work as a guitar together. And then I start drawing out sketches, and then usually I just go from there straight to a piece of wood and the first one out there, and then we'll cut it out kind of freehand and fuss it into shape until it's to where I like it. And at that point, I'll copy it onto a template. So if I want to reproduce certain shapes, I've got templates laying all over the place where I can just pull them up and, cut them out. But they're all based on how, my system of construction, which is completely different than everybody else's. That's what you're really seeing more than anything, is that I'm not building them like a Fender or Gibson, because if I were, they would end up looking kind of like that. There would be a lot of that aspect. But since I threw that out the window, or because I never really learned it in the first place, it's like the Steinberger. It's going in a different direction completely, and look at the results. I see it as a whole lot of freedom there, that I can do whatever I want with it, because I'm not wed to that certain way of doing things. And I can change styles pretty quickly. I get bored with a certain style sometimes, and I say, the hell with it, I'm not going to make that anymore. And, I've made enough of those. They're gagging me. I hate those things. It gets to that point. It's always, you got to be careful what you make, because you may have to make a lot of them. If you don't like it, you could be in trouble. It's nice to be able to change directions to keep it fresh. Otherwise, I'd be going bored if I was just doing the same one or two over and over and over again. That would be awful.
Wow, how long does this all take you? How long does it take you to get a guitar out from start to finish?
Well, just once I got the idea, I can make one in 2 weeks. The thing that takes the most time, the necks take a few days, just because they're precision work and there's a lot of steps involved. And necks the most important part. That's what the guitar really is. Everything is about the neck. The tone, everything comes out of the neck. It's not the body. The body. Everybody talks about the body wood, does this tone, that tone. The body adds maybe 20%, maybe less. It's an anchor for the neck. All the wood tone and everything about a guitar comes out of the neck, and so you have to spend a lot of time on that. And then the rest of it, blocking it out, cutting it out from raw wood and gluing things up. That's a couple of days. You can get a thing that looks like a guitar pretty quickly, within a couple days, where all the routes are made and all the holes are drilled. But then comes the finishing part, and that's because I'm not just rounding off the edges and sending a plank out there like your typical guitar. I spend a good day or two just grinding and sanding and shaping the thing out. So, you played them. They got nice contours, and they're soft and round, and everything is, kind of lovely. That takes a couple of days. And then, there's days of it sitting around finishing. If you paint something, painting takes forever. Painting's a big time killer, and I've learned over the years to charge for it because painting is slow work. And then, even if I oil it, it takes 3-4 days to oil it. So I can finish one in 2 weeks. Is the way I look at it, start to finish. And then, setup takes a day or two. Setup's really tricky. That's not easy. That's when you're getting down there, really fussing to get the strings in exactly the right spot. And you go from like slugging these big timbers around down to filing slots with a .010 file, within 32nd of an inch. It's just, it's like you start big and you end small. And, it's a whole range of different things you have to do. But getting back to the neck, I can't emphasize this enough. The neck is the most important part of the guitar, and it's what your guitar, wood tone-wise, is going to sound like. And nobody talks about it. And nobody even acknowledges it. Because why? I don't know. Because they look at the biggest part. Oh, that's got to be the part that matters, the body. It doesn't. The body does not vibrate nearly as much. It doesn't have nearly as much strings going over it. I mean, think of it that way. And it doesn't have all the stresses that the neck does. And the reason nobody talks about the neck primarily is because you don't really get a choice. You either have, out there in guitar world general, you either have a maple neck or you have a mahogany neck. That's about it, and they're solid one-piece necks with a little thin fretboard cap on it. And so people talk about the fretboard caps, like, oh well, I got the redwood, the rosewood, the Brazilian sounds better than this or that. So, well, it doesn't. That's not doing anything. It's like talking about the scab on top of the pimple. For God's sakes, it's not doing anything. It's that one maple neck, or it's that solid piece of mahogany neck that is generating most of the sound. And so, since you really don't have a choice about your neck, they talk about the fretboard. They talk about the body because you can have a choice about that. I make my necks out of 3 separate pieces that all have kind of equal mass, and it tends to shape the sound in one direction or the other. And it structurally is better because you don't have because I put a scarf joint on the head. I don't have that green run out, so you don't have the classic Gibson snapping headstock syndrome, and you still have the angled back head, so you don't have the Fender string T syndrome. It solves a lot of problems. It makes a very structurally sound neck. I put carbon fiber in there. I put a dual action truss rod in there because necks will go either way. You never know. Like we were talking about earlier, wood will just start moving. You never know. So you have that protection of if it goes one way or the other, if you want to push it one way or the other. And that's why I spend so much time on the necks, because they're the most elaborate part of my guitars. And very few people care. They just don't think about it. They don't know. They don't care. And, they're just willing to accept what is. And I think a lot of the difference with my guitars, why they sound so different, is because, the pickups are all the same. You can only wrap a wire around a magnet so many times. We're all doing it the same way, but it's the structure of the neck and the sound that I'm getting out of my necks that really changes. And I can hear the difference from neck to neck, because some have wangy fretboards, some have the Duke fretboards, or they have maple. They all have a little bit different characteristic that's very discernible. And, so I concentrate very much on that. In fact, I got 4 necks in the basement right now I'm working on all day. I'll be working on those just to get them blocked out. And, that's critical stuff, the neck is. Nobody cares. Nobody knows.
Well, they'll know now, because, we'll blast it over the internet for all to hear.
I've been saying it for years. I get the dumb look. I get the deer in the headlight, the RCA Victor dog. I get that look, like, what? What are you talking about? Of course it's the body. They just, well, you gotta pick and choose your fights you're going to have. But, all the guys who make guitars, they know. They know what's happening there.
So, while I was at the guitar show, I think it was the only time I ever saw a guitar completely made out of walnut, and I don't think it was at your booth. But
Oh,
have you considered walnut as a it's
I
a
use walnut. I use walnut
you
all the
do?
time. Walnut's nice. It gets a bum rap because people think it's heavy. You know, some pieces are heavier than others. Same with cherry. I love cherry. And it gets a bum rap like it's too heavy. Well, cherry sometimes is pretty lightweight. I mean, geez, I use maple all the time, and that's about as heavy as it gets for for domestic woods. Butternut's one of my favorites, and butternut is in the walnut family, and it's considerably lighter than walnut. It's kind of known as the white walnut because they have a very similar grain, and it's it's a whiter color. But I think I use those all the time. I mean, I'll use them in the necks occasionally. I'll use them usually for just how good they look on a body, or some of the smaller pieces.
Right.
I'm not one of those guys that think there's any advantage to building a guitar all out of one piece of wood or all out of the same wood. I just, my theory is you want to mix them up a little bit to get a little more tonal range in there, because every piece of wood has its own sort of pitch. It brings its own tonal palette to the mix, and that's all it's got. So you have to mix it up to harder, softer stuff in there to widen that out. Otherwise, you're going to be very narrow. It's going to have a very narrow band of tonal response, and I'm always looking for the most possible. I'm not looking for a narrow band. I want, and that's the way I do my electronics too. I do switching so that you can get 20 different sounds out of the damn things. I don't want just 3 sounds. I want as many sounds possible. And I'm not doing anything special. I'm not putting any batteries or any preamps in there. It's just by using switching, you can open up the range of tones just in the electronics. So in the wood, all across the board, I'm trying to get variety. And I also think it's kind of boring when you just see one solid color through the whole thing. I like to mix up, aesthetically. I like to see a mixture of colors and textures and grain going this way and grain going. I break all those rules. I'm wearing plaid on plaid sometimes. You're not supposed to do that, but I like that. I like it sometimes where it's just a crazy amount of patterns and textures going on. I mean, it's just a tiny little thing. A guitar's not like it's not like an entire suit you're wearing or a house. It's just this. It's a piece of jewelry. It's kind of the way I look at it aesthetically. A big piece of jewelry.
And now that everybody is all excited about this, where do we go to get one?
You go to my website, or you go to my Facebook page, and the best thing you do is you go to my Facebook page and you see what I'm doing, what I'm working on, and then you can follow along and see, you can pick and choose. I have one dealer, rebelguitars.com, is in Alabama, who will deal if you want to trade. He's good for trades and that sort of thing. Whereas I'm not going to trade because I'm not a guitar player. I got enough guitars. I make guitars. I don't want any more guitars. I want to get rid of guitars. So I use Wes at Rebel Guitars. He's my one dealer, and that's all I can handle. I only make 24, 30 guitars a year. So I'm not going to be in the big box store. I can, I'm thank God for the internet. That's all I can say. Thank God for the internet. I sell a lot of stuff overseas. A lot of things. I just got a note this morning from a guy in New Zealand. I sent him a guitar, but geez, took a week or so to get there. But they go to Japan. They go to Asia. They go to Europe. I haven't gotten to South America yet. That's my next. I'll get there soon enough. But I sell a lot overseas.
Wow.
And again, that's because the wonders of the internet.
That's great, though. That is really great. It's so nice to see some actual innovation going on out there. I know I talk to the guys at Lifeblood Picks a lot, and it's really nice. There's just a ton of innovation going on in the guitar world right now, and that's
well, because it's wide open is the way I look at it. I mean, everybody's just been beating the same old dead pony for years. They just won't give it up. It's got to be this way, it's got to be that way, and then crazy kooks like me come along and go, well, let's try this, and there's 6 billion people in the world. There's a lot of people out there. Even if you're at a tiny percentage of the people who are interested, that's still a lot of people. So that's how I can make it on the fringes, because there's still plenty of people who are interested in what I'm doing. Even though I'm so far, I call myself a fringe dweller. I'm way out there on the edge of the mainstream, and that's fine. That's where I'm comfortable. That's where I want to be, and there is an audience out there, and why not? Come on, it's just a guitar. It's not like I'm breaking any laws or anything, right? It's just a guitar. There should be variation. We don't drive cars from the 50s anymore, do we? Sure, they're nice looking cars, but would you really want to drive one of those things every day, or would you rather drive that, nice, easy driving car you've got now? I mean, we don't eat the same dinner every night. That's the thing about guitars, is they just got stuck on a few things and they wouldn't let go. It was only going to go this one direction, and variety is good. That's my attitude. Variety is good.
And it absolutely is. It's I've got a Les Paul copy. I've got a Steinberger here in front of me. Obviously, I don't tread the same path that a lot of people do. But I really do appreciate you taking the time, and I'll get this put together and out there just as soon as it can.
Well, thank you very much. You're very welcome.
Thank you. Oh.